The moment I bought my house in Boulder, Colorado, I thought I'd finally escaped the nightmare of renting and landlords breathing down my neck. But apparently nobody warned me that homeowners associations were just landlords with even more power and Karen haircuts. My name is Ryan Michaels, and I'm a 34-year-old software developer who works remotely. I bought a 3-bedroom ranch-style home in the Meadowbrook Estates development about 2 years ago. The neighborhood seemed nice enough when I moved in. Lots of families, well-maintained properties, and a community playground that all the kids used. The HOA seemed like a minor inconvenience at most. Just another bill to pay every quarter and some rules about keeping your lawn mowed and not painting your house neon pink. For the first year, I barely interacted with the HOA at all. I paid my dues on time, kept my grass trimmed, and minded my own business. Then, Patricia Duncan became the HOA president. Patricia was everything you'd expect from the stereotype. She was 47 years old with a severely angled bob haircut that seemed designed to cut through objections like a knife. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a live, laugh, love bumper sticker right next to one that said HOA board member, like it was some kind of badge of honor. She had that particular brand of suburban mom energy that made you feel like you were being judged for existing in her general vicinity. The problem started in November of last year. I was working from home, knee-deep in debugging some particularly nasty code when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia standing there with a clipboard, which should have been my first warning sign. "Ryan," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss your community obligations." I blinked at her. "My what?" She sighed like I was a particularly slow child. "Your community obligations. As outlined in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, all homeowners are required to contribute to community maintenance." "Right, which is why I pay my HOA dues every quarter," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "The dues cover administrative costs and general upkeep," Patricia said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "I'm talking about your personal contribution. We have a rotating schedule for snow removal from the community playground." This was news to me. I don't remember signing up for any snow removal. "You didn't sign up," Patricia said, her voice taking on that condescending tone that made my teeth grind. "You were assigned. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates is assigned certain duties on a rotating basis. Your duty is snow removal from the playground equipment and surrounding area." I must have looked as confused as I felt because Patricia let out another dramatic sigh and flipped through her clipboard. "It's all here in the bylaws you signed when you purchased your home. Section 12 covers community participation requirements." "I'll need to review my documents," I said, which was code for "I don't believe you and I'm going to check if you're making this up." "Fine," Patricia said sharply. "But the first snowfall of the season is expected this weekend, and I expect you to fulfill your duties. The playground needs to be cleared within 12 hours of snowfall ending. That includes the ground surface, all equipment, benches, and the walkways leading to and from the playground." She handed me a packet of papers. "Here are the specifications and requirements. I've highlighted the relevant sections." After she left, I spent the rest of the afternoon digging through the massive document I'd signed at closing. Sure enough, buried on page 87 of the HOA bylaws, there was indeed a section about community participation requirements. It was vague enough to be interpreted about 50 different ways, but it did mention that homeowners could be assigned maintenance duties. What bothered me more was that my real estate agent had never mentioned this. Neither had the home inspector or anyone else involved in the purchase. This felt like one of those things that should have been disclosed upfront. But apparently, reading 87 pages of legal jargon was just expected. The first snow came that Saturday night. It wasn't much, maybe 3 inches, but I dutifully bundled up on Sunday morning and headed to the playground with my shovel. The playground was about a quarter-mile from my house, situated in the center of the development. It was a decent-sized area with swings, slides, a climbing structure, several benches, and a rubberized ground surface that was now buried under fresh powder. I spent 4 hours that morning shoveling. The playground area was larger than I'd realized, and clearing all the equipment, benches, and walkways was exhausting work. My back ached, my hands were frozen despite my gloves, and I was seriously questioning my life choices by the time I finished. Over the next few weeks, we got hit with several more snowfalls. Each time, I trudged out to the playground and cleared everything according to Patricia's specifications. It became clear pretty quickly that I was the only one doing this. I never saw any other homeowners out there, and when I asked my neighbor Tom about it, he just laughed. "Man, you actually fell for that," Tom said, shaking his head. "Patricia tries this every year. She picks some new homeowner and tells them they're required to do whatever task she doesn't want to pay for. Last year, she convinced the guy in Unit 42 that he had to repaint the community mailboxes himself." "Are you serious?" I asked, feeling my anger rising. "So this isn't actually required?" "Oh, it's probably technically in the bylaws somewhere," Tom said. "Patricia makes sure everything she does is technically legal, even if it's completely unreasonable. But here's the thing, nobody enforces it. Most people just ignore her until she moves on to harassing someone else." That conversation happened in mid-December, right before another major snowstorm was forecast. I decided I was done being Patricia's personal snow removal service. When the storm dumped 8 inches on us, I stayed inside, worked on my code, and enjoyed my hot coffee while watching the snow accumulate on the playground through my window. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning the day after the storm. I ignored it. Patricia left 3 voicemails, each progressively more agitated, demanding that I clear the playground immediately. Then she showed up at my door. "Ryan, what is the meaning of this?" Patricia demanded when I opened the door. "The playground is completely snowed in. You were supposed to clear it 12 hours after the snowfall ended." "Yeah, I'm not doing that anymore," I said calmly. Her face turned an impressive shade of red. "Excuse me. This is not optional. This is a community obligation outlined in the bylaws." "Then I suggest the HOA hire a professional snow removal service," I said. "I have a full-time job, Patricia. I'm not spending 4 hours every time it snows to clear a playground that's technically the HOA's responsibility." "The HOA budget doesn't include snow removal services," Patricia snapped. "That's why we have community participation requirements." "Sounds like a budgeting problem," I said. "Not my problem." I closed the door while she was still sputtering. My phone continued to ring throughout the day, but I ignored it. I'd done my research after Tom's revelation, and I'd found some interesting information. While the bylaws did technically allow the HOA to assign maintenance duties, there were also provisions about those duties being reasonable and equally distributed. Patricia had been assigning snow removal exclusively to me, while other homeowners had no assigned duties at all. That wasn't equal distribution. I expected fines or more harassment, but what I got was silence. 2 weeks went by without any word from Patricia or the HOA. The playground remained buried under snow, and I noticed fewer kids playing outside. I felt a little guilty about that, but not guilty enough to go back to being Patricia's unpaid laborer. Then January rolled around, and everything went sideways in a way I never could have predicted. It started with the Miller family. They lived on the other side of the development, and their 7-year-old daughter Emma loved the playground. On a Saturday afternoon in mid-January, Emma convinced her dad to take her to the playground despite the snow. The dad, Josh Miller, figured kids play in snow all the time, so what was the harm? The harm was that beneath the accumulated snow and ice was the climbing structure, and nobody could see exactly where the equipment started and ended. Emma was running around, having a great time, when she tripped over one of the climbing bars that was hidden under the snow. She fell hard, and her leg bent at an angle that legs definitely shouldn't bend. Josh called 911, and Emma was rushed to Boulder Community Health. She'd broken her femur, which is apparently one of the more serious broken bones a kid can get. She needed surgery, pins, the whole 9 yards. The medical bills were going to be astronomical. That's when Josh did what any reasonable person would do. He filed a claim with the HOA's liability insurance. The HOA had insurance specifically for situations like this. The playground was HOA property, and if someone got injured due to inadequate maintenance, the insurance was supposed to cover it. It was one of the main reasons homeowners paid their dues, to maintain that insurance coverage for community property. But here's where things got interesting. I found this out later through the neighborhood grapevine and some public records requests, but apparently, Patricia had been playing fast and loose with the HOA finances. The insurance premiums had been going up every year, and Patricia had decided that was unacceptable. She'd been shopping around for cheaper insurance, and eventually, she found a company willing to offer a bare-bones policy for half the price. The catch was that this bare-bones policy required the HOA to maintain certain safety standards. One of those standards was keeping community recreational areas clear of hazards, including snow and ice accumulation. If the HOA failed to maintain those standards, the insurance company could deny claims. When Josh filed his claim, the insurance company sent out an investigator. The investigator took one look at the playground, which by this point had been buried under snow for nearly a month, and denied the claim. The playground had not been maintained according to the policy requirements, therefore the insurance coverage had effectively lapsed. Josh Miller was now looking at medical bills totaling over $60,000, and the HOA's insurance wasn't going to cover a penny of it. He was, understandably, furious. The emergency HOA meeting was called for a Tuesday evening in late January. I almost didn't go, but Tom convinced me that I needed to be there to protect myself. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the playground that was usually used for birthday parties and baby showers. The room was packed. Pretty much every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates had shown up, which was unusual. Normally, these meetings had maybe a dozen people. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, looking decidedly uncomfortable for the first time since I'd met her. Josh Miller stood up as soon as the meeting was called to order. He was a big guy, over 6 feet tall and built like someone who worked construction for a living, which he did. His voice was shaking with barely contained rage. "My daughter is 7 years old," Josh started. "She's in a hospital bed with pins in her leg because your playground was a death trap. And now your insurance company is telling me that they won't cover any of the medical expenses because the HOA failed to maintain the property." Patricia tried to interrupt, but Josh wasn't having it. "I'm not done. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost? The surgery alone was $30,000. Then there's physical therapy, follow-up appointments, pain medication. We're looking at $60, maybe $70,000 total. And that's not even counting the fact that my wife had to take unpaid leave from her job to take care of Emma. Mr. Miller, I understand you're upset, Patricia began, but several other homeowners started shouting over her. Who decided to change the insurance policy? Someone yelled. Why wasn't the playground maintained? Another voice called out. Patricia held up her hands, trying to regain control of the meeting. Everyone, please, let me explain. The previous insurance policy was becoming cost prohibitive. The premiums had increased by 40% over the past 2 years. As HOA president, it's my responsibility to manage our budget effectively. By cutting our insurance coverage, a woman near the front asked incredulously. That's not managing the budget, that's gambling with our liability. The insurance policy we have is perfectly adequate, Patricia insisted. It provides all the necessary coverage. The issue is that the playground wasn't maintained according to the policy requirements. And whose responsibility was it to maintain the playground? Josh demanded. This was the moment I'd been dreading. Patricia's eyes found me in the crowd, and I saw a calculating look cross her face. The playground snow removal was assigned to Ryan Michaels, Patricia said, pointing at me. As outlined in the community participation requirements, Mr. Michaels was responsible for clearing snow and ice from the playground area. He failed to fulfill that responsibility, which directly led to this situation. Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt my heart rate spike, but I forced myself to stay calm. That's not exactly accurate, I said, standing up so everyone could hear me clearly. Patricia assigned me to clear the playground without any proper notice or training. She showed up at my door one day with a clipboard and told me I was responsible for clearing a quarter-acre playground area by myself within 12 hours of every snowfall. No compensation, no equipment provided beyond my own shovel, no assistance. It's a community participation requirement, Patricia interjected. All homeowners have duties. What duties do you have, Patricia? I asked, turning the question back on her. What duties does anyone else in this room have? Because from what I can tell, I was the only person you assigned any duties to. That's not equal distribution, and I'd argue it's not reasonable either. Tom stood up, backing me up. Patricia does this every year. She picks someone and dumps whatever task she doesn't want to deal with on them. Last year it was repainting mailboxes. The year before it was weeding all the common areas. It's always some new homeowner who doesn't know better. That's not true, Patricia protested, but her face was red again. The participation requirements are clearly outlined in the bylaws. Then show us the schedule, another homeowner called out. If everyone has assigned duties, there should be a schedule showing what everyone is responsible for. Patricia shuffled through her papers but didn't produce any schedule, because there wasn't one. She'd been making this up as she went along, assigning tasks arbitrarily and calling it community participation. This is ridiculous, Josh said, his voice rising again. We're not here to debate Patricia's made-up chore list. My daughter is injured, and the HOA's insurance won't cover it because nobody maintained the playground. Someone is responsible for this, and someone is going to pay. The HOA has some funds in reserve, Patricia said quickly. We can possibly offer some assistance with the medical bills. How much? Josh demanded. Well, we have approximately $12,000 in our emergency fund. $12,000. Josh looked like he was going to have a stroke. The bills are going to be at least $60,000. $12,000 doesn't even cover a quarter of that. Perhaps you could work out a payment plan with the hospital, Patricia suggested, which was absolutely the wrong thing to say. A payment plan. Josh's wife, Lisa, stood up now too. We shouldn't have to work out a payment plan. This isn't our fault. The HOA maintains that playground. You all collect our dues every quarter for exactly this kind of situation. And now you're telling us we're just out of luck. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Everyone was shouting at once. Some people defending Patricia, most people angry about the insurance situation, others demanding to know more about the HOA finances. I tried to stay quiet and not draw more attention to myself, but I caught several hostile looks from other homeowners who clearly blamed me for not clearing the playground. Finally, someone made a motion to remove Patricia as HOA president and call for an emergency election. The motion passed almost unanimously, with only Patricia and one of her friends on the board voting against it. Patricia looked absolutely stricken as she gathered her papers and left the clubhouse. Her reign of suburban terror officially ended. But that didn't solve the immediate problem. The Millers still had massive medical bills. The insurance still wasn't covering them. And now the HOA was in complete disarray with no leadership and a potential lawsuit hanging over everyone's heads. The next few weeks were tense. A lawyer named Marcus Reed was elected as the new HOA president. Marcus actually seemed competent and reasonable, which was a refreshing change. His first act was to hire a real attorney to review the insurance situation and figure out what the HOA's liability was. The news wasn't good. According to the attorney, the HOA could potentially be held liable for Emma's injuries because the playground had not been maintained according to basic safety standards. The insurance policy's denial was valid under the terms Patricia had agreed to. The HOA could be sued, and if that happened, the HOA's limited funds would be depleted almost immediately. The remaining costs would be assessed to the homeowners, potentially adding thousands of dollars to everyone's annual fees. People were panicking. Nobody wanted to be on the hook for someone else's medical bills, even though that's essentially what insurance is. But more than that, people were angry. Patricia had made decisions that affected everyone without proper oversight or approval from the full board or the homeowners. That's when the investigation started. Marcus, being a lawyer himself, knew something was wrong with how Patricia had been running things. He requested a full audit of the HOA finances, and what they found was stunning. Patricia hadn't just changed the insurance policy. She'd been systematically cutting costs and funneling the savings into an account that she claimed was for future development. But there was no documentation about what this development was supposed to be. The account had accumulated nearly $40,000 over the past 3 years, money that should have been used to maintain community property and services. Even more damning, Patricia had been paying herself a salary. Most HOA presidents are volunteers, but Patricia had been writing herself checks for $500 a month, calling it an administrative fee. There was no approval for this in any of the HOA minutes or bylaws. She'd just been paying herself with community funds. Marcus brought this information to the next HOA meeting, and the response was immediate. Someone called the police right there in the meeting. Patricia had committed embezzlement, plain and simple. She'd stolen from the HOA, and that was a crime. The Boulder Police Department sent 2 officers to Patricia's house the next day. I wasn't there to see it, but Tom lived nearby and watched the whole thing. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe, clearly not expecting police officers to show up at 9 in the morning. They had a warrant for her arrest on charges of embezzlement and fraud. Apparently, Patricia did not go quietly. She screamed at the officers that this was all a misunderstanding, that she had authority to manage the HOA funds as she saw fit, that she was being persecuted for trying to keep costs down. The officers weren't interested in her explanations. They handcuffed her right there on her front porch while her teenage son watched from the doorway. Tom said it was the most entertaining thing he'd seen in years, which I felt was a bit cruel, but I also understood the sentiment. Patricia had made a lot of people's lives miserable with her petty power trips and arbitrary rules. The arrest made the local news. HOA president arrested for embezzlement was the headline in the Boulder Daily Camera. The story detailed Patricia's financial mismanagement and the situation with Emma Miller's injury. Suddenly, Meadowbrook Estates was infamous, but here's what nobody expected. The publicity from Patricia's arrest actually helped solve the Miller family's problem. A local personal injury attorney named Sarah Kingsley saw the news story and reached out to the Millers. Sarah specialized in premises liability cases, and she saw a clear path to recovering the medical expenses. Sarah filed a lawsuit against Patricia Duncan personally, not the HOA. The argument was that Patricia had committed fraud by misrepresenting the HOA's insurance coverage and failing to maintain the property, despite having funds available to do so. She'd created a dangerous situation through her negligence and financial mismanagement. The lawsuit also named the insurance company that had denied the claim. Sarah argued that the insurance company had failed to properly inform the HOA about the policy requirements when they sold the cheaper policy. If the HOA board had known that the new policy required such strict maintenance standards, they never would have approved the change, except they were never given a chance to approve it because Patricia had made the decision unilaterally. The insurance company settled quickly. They didn't want the bad publicity of denying coverage to an injured 7-year-old, especially when their own sales practices were being called into question. They agreed to cover Emma's medical bills up to the policy limit of $100,000, which was more than enough to cover everything. As for Patricia, things got worse before they got better. The criminal case moved forward, and the district attorney's office took it seriously. Embezzling from an HOA might sound like a minor crime, but it's still theft, and Patricia had taken thousands of dollars that didn't belong to her. In March, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of fraud. In exchange for pleading guilty, she avoided jail time but was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and she had to repay every penny she'd taken from the HOA, plus damages. The total came to about $50,000 once you included the money she'd paid herself and the costs associated with the insurance debacle. Patricia also had to resign from the HOA board, obviously, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado for 10 years. Her husband filed for divorce about a month after her sentencing, which I felt bad about for their kids' sake. But apparently, this wasn't the first time Patricia had pulled something like this. She'd been forced to resign from a PTA board at her kids' previous school for similar financial improprieties. Meanwhile, Marcus and the new HOA board were working to fix the mess Patricia had left behind. The first thing they did was hire a professional property management company to handle the day-to-day operations of the HOA. No more volunteers making unilateral decisions about insurance policies or assigning random homeowners to do maintenance work. The property management company immediately hired a snow removal service for the playground and all other common areas. The cost was added to the HOA dues, which went up by about $50 a quarter, but everyone agreed it was worth it to avoid another situation like Emma's injury. They also rewrote the bylaws to add proper oversight and checks on the HOA board's authority. No more unilateral decisions by the president. Everything had to be voted on by the full board, and any expenditure over $500 required approval from the homeowners at a general meeting. The bylaws also clearly stated that homeowners could not be assigned maintenance duties without their explicit consent, and any such duties had to be compensated at fair market rates. As for me, I kept a low profile through all of this. Some people still blamed me for not clearing the playground, even though it became clear that Patricia had put me in an impossible situation. A few homeowners actually apologized to me once they understood what had really happened. Most people just wanted to move on and forget the whole mess. Emma Miller recovered fully, thank goodness. Kids are resilient, and by April she was back to running around and playing like nothing had happened. She had some impressive scars and a good story to tell, but no permanent damage. Josh and Lisa were appropriately grateful to everyone who had helped them through the situation, but I could tell they were also ready to move on from Meadowbrook Estates. They put their house on the market in May and moved to a neighborhood without an HOA. I couldn't blame them. I'd been thinking about doing the same thing. The whole experience had left a bad taste in my mouth about HOAs in general. But the new board was actually competent, and the professional property management company made everything run so much smoother that I decided to give it another chance. In June, I got a letter from Patricia's attorney. It was part of her restitution, apparently. She had to write personal apology letters to everyone she'd wronged during her time as HOA president. The letter was exactly what you'd expect, a half-hearted apology that blamed her actions on stress and misunderstandings, with no real acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused. I threw the letter away. I didn't need Patricia's fake apology. What I needed was for her to never have power over other people again, and the court system had handled that part. The criminal proceedings wrapped up in August. There was a final restitution hearing where Patricia had to present her payment plan for the $50,000 she owed. She'd gotten a job at a call center and was making payments of $500 a month, which meant she'd be paying for the next 8 years. Her lawyer argued that this was a significant hardship given her divorce and loss of income, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. She'd stolen from her neighbors, and she had to pay it back. One interesting thing came out during the restitution hearing. The investigation had revealed that the $40,000 Patricia had squirreled away in the future development account had actually been earmarked for something specific. She'd been planning to use it to renovate the clubhouse and name it after herself. Patricia Duncan Community Center had a nice ring to it, in her opinion. She'd been building up this fund without telling anyone so she could surprise the community with the renovations and secure her legacy as the greatest HOA president Meadowbrook Estates had ever had. The narcissism of it was almost impressive. She'd cut essential services, exposed the community to liability and embezzled funds, all so she could have a building named after herself. The judge actually laughed when this came out, a short, sharp bark of disbelief before she composed herself and continued with the sentencing. By September, life in Meadowbrook Estates had returned to something resembling normal. The playground had been properly maintained all summer. The new HOA board was functioning well, and the property management company had implemented a bunch of improvements that made the neighborhood more pleasant for everyone. They'd repaved some of the streets, upgraded the lighting in common areas, and even added some new landscaping. The legal cases were all resolved. The insurance company had paid the Millers, Patricia was making her restitution payments, and the HOA had recovered the embezzled funds that were still accessible. The community had moved on. I'd learned a valuable lesson about reading the fine print and understanding exactly what you're agreeing to when you buy a home with an HOA. I'd also learned that sometimes refusing to go along with unreasonable demands is the right thing to do, even if it causes short-term problems. If I just kept clearing that playground, Patricia would have kept abusing her authority, the insurance situation would have stayed hidden, and eventually, something worse might have happened. In October, the new HOA board threw a community barbecue at the playground. It was a beautiful fall day, and pretty much everyone showed up. Kids were playing on the equipment, parents were chatting and eating hamburgers, and there was a general sense of relief that the drama was finally over. Emma Miller was there too, even though her family had moved to a different neighborhood. Josh and Lisa brought her back for the barbecue because she'd missed her friends from Meadowbrook Estates. She was running around, completely healed, no sign of the injury except for the scars she proudly showed anyone who asked. Marcus gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition. He acknowledged that the past year had been difficult but expressed optimism about the future of the community. He also made a point of thanking the homeowners who had stood up and demanded accountability, though he didn't name anyone specifically. I stood at the edge of the playground, watching the scene and reflecting on everything that had happened. It was strange to think that a year ago, I'd been shoveling snow from this exact spot, furious at Patricia for dumping this responsibility on me, with no idea of the chain of events that was about to unfold. Tom walked over with 2 beers and handed me one. "Hell of a year, huh?" "That's an understatement," I said, taking the beer gratefully. "You know people are still talking about you," Tom said. "The guy who took down the HOA president." "I didn't take anyone down," I protested. "I just stopped shoveling snow. Patricia took herself down with her own corruption." "Sure, but if you'd kept shoveling, none of this would have come out," Tom pointed out. "Emma probably still would have gotten hurt eventually, some other way. But the insurance thing, the embezzlement, all of that would have stayed hidden. Patricia would still be running this place like her personal fiefdom." I'd thought about that a lot over the past few months. The guilt about Emma's injury had been hard to deal with, even though logically I knew it wasn't really my fault. But Tom was right that sometimes things have to break before they can be fixed. "I'm just glad it's over," I said finally. "Amen to that," Tom said, raising his beer in a toast. We stood there drinking our beers and watching the kids play. The playground looked good, well-maintained and safe. The grass around it was green and neatly trimmed. The benches had been repainted. It looked like a community that actually cared about its shared spaces, not a community being run by one person's ego and paranoia. As the sun started to set and the barbecue wound down, I helped fold up tables and put away chairs. It felt good to contribute to the community in a real way, not as some assigned obligation, but as a voluntary member of the neighborhood. This was what community participation should feel like. I walked home as the streetlights flickered on, feeling content for the first time in months. My house looked warm and welcoming in the twilight. I'd painted the shutters over the summer, a nice dark blue that I'd checked with the HOA first to make sure it was approved. Everything was above board now, no surprises, no arbitrary rules. Inside, I made dinner and settled in to watch some television. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. It was a link to a news article. The headline read, "Former HOA President Sentenced for Embezzlement, a Cautionary Tale." The article was a feature piece in a regional magazine about HOA abuse and what homeowners could do to protect themselves. It detailed Patricia's case and several others from around Colorado. There were interviews with legal experts talking about the importance of oversight and transparency in HOA governance. My case was mentioned, though thankfully not by name, just as an example of how refusing unreasonable demands can sometimes expose larger problems. The article concluded with advice for homeowners. Read your bylaws carefully. Attend HOA meetings. Ask questions about finances and insurance. And don't be afraid to challenge authority when something doesn't seem right. It was good advice, the kind of advice I wished I'd had before I bought my house. I texted Marcus back. Good article. Hopefully it helps some other people avoid this mess. He responded immediately. That's the idea. Thanks for everything you did, even though you didn't know you were doing it. I smiled at that. It was true. I hadn't set out to expose HOA corruption or reform our neighborhood governance. I'd just been a guy who didn't want to shovel snow from a playground by himself anymore. But sometimes the small acts of resistance are the ones that matter most. Over the next few months, Meadowbrook Estates continued to thrive under the new management. The property values actually went up slightly, which the real estate agents attributed to better management and the resolution of all the legal issues. New families moved in, and they were all given comprehensive orientations about the HOA, its rules, and their rights as homeowners. No more surprises buried in page 87 of the bylaws. Patricia, meanwhile, had moved out of the neighborhood. The gossip was that she'd had to sell her house to pay for the divorce settlement and make a lump sum payment toward her restitution. She'd moved to an apartment in a different part of Boulder, away from anyone who knew about her disgrace. Her kids had changed schools. She'd essentially had to start her entire life over because of her own greed and ego. I felt some pity for her, but not much. She'd had multiple opportunities to do the right thing. She could have admitted her mistakes, worked with the board to fix the insurance situation, and taken responsibility for her actions. Instead, she doubled down, tried to blame me for the playground situation, and only shown remorse when it was legally required. The holidays came and went. Meadowbrook Estates was beautiful in December, with everyone decorating their houses and the HOA putting up tasteful lights in the common areas. There was a community party at the clubhouse, which definitely was not going to be renamed after anyone, where kids visited with Santa and adults drank spiked eggnog and pretended to like each other's terrible cookies. It felt normal, in the best possible way. This was what I'd imagined when I bought a house in a planned community. Neighbors who were friendly but not intrusive, shared spaces that were well maintained, and a sense of collective responsibility without any one person holding too much power. As I write this now, it's been over a year since I stopped clearing snow from that playground. Emma Miller is 8 years old and completely healthy. The Miller family is happy in their new neighborhood, one without an HOA where they can paint their house whatever color they want and nobody bothers them about it. Patricia Duncan is 3 years into her probation, working her call center job and making her monthly restitution payments. She's forbidden from serving on any HOA board, which is probably the best thing that could have happened for HOAs across Colorado. Meadowbrook Estates is thriving. The professional property management has made everything run smoothly. The HOA board is diverse and engaged, with term limits to prevent anyone from accumulating too much power. The bylaws have been rewritten to be clear and reasonable. And most importantly, nobody is being assigned random maintenance tasks without their consent. As for me, I'm still living in my house, still working remotely, still enjoying the peace and quiet of suburban life. I attend the HOA meetings occasionally, just to stay informed, but I'm not involved in the drama anymore. I don't want to be. I've had my fill of HOA politics to last a lifetime. But I learned something important through this whole experience. Systems of power, even small ones like homeowners associations, need oversight and accountability. When one person has too much authority with too little scrutiny, bad things happen. It doesn't matter if they start with good intentions or bad ones. Power without accountability corrupts, even at the level of deciding who shovels snow from a playground. The criminal justice system worked the way it was supposed to. Patricia was investigated, arrested, charged, and convicted. She's serving her sentence and making restitution. The victims, primarily the HOA community and the Miller family, have been made whole as much as possible. It's not a perfect resolution. Emma still has scars and the community still lost a year to chaos and stress, but it's justice within the bounds of the law and me. I'm just a guy who stopped shoveling snow from a playground. Everything else followed from that one simple decision to say no to an unreasonable demand. I didn't set out to be a hero or a whistleblower or anything dramatic like that. I just wanted to write my code and live my life without spending 4 hours shoveling snow every time winter weather came through Boulder. But that's how change often happens, isn't it? One person says no. One person refuses to go along with the way things have always been done. One person asks uncomfortable questions about why things are the way they are. And suddenly, the whole rotten structure comes tumbling down, revealing all the corruption and incompetence that was hidden underneath. I hope that other people in similar situations, whether it's an HOA or a workplace or any other organization, remember this story. Remember that you have the right to question authority. You have the right to refuse unreasonable demands. You have the right to expect transparency and accountability from people who hold power over you. And if you buy a house in an HOA community, for the love of everything holy, read the entire bylaws document before you sign. Don't skip ahead to page 87 like I did. Don't assume that everything is fine just because the neighborhood looks nice. Ask hard questions about the budget, the insurance, the decision-making processes. Attend the meetings. Know who's running things and whether they're doing a good job. Because if you don't, you might end up like me, standing in a playground with a shovel at 7 in the morning, wondering how you got into this mess, and unknowingly setting off a chain of events that will end with your HOA president in handcuffs. The snow came back this winter, of course. Boulder gets plenty of it. But this time, I watched from my window as the professional snow removal crew cleared the playground with their truck-mounted snow blowers and proper equipment. They had it done in 30 minutes, and it looked 1,000 times better than anything I could have done with my manual shovel. That's the other lesson here. Sometimes it's worth paying professionals to do things properly. Patricia's attempts to cut costs by forcing free labor from homeowners didn't save money in the long run. It cost the community far more in legal fees, insurance premiums, and pure chaos than it ever would have cost to just hire proper services in the first place. But penny wise and pound foolish has always been the domain of petty tyrants who think they're being clever. Patricia wasn't unique in that regard. There are probably hundreds or thousands of HOA presidents across America right now making similar decisions, cutting corners and accumulating unchecked power. Some of them will get away with it. Some of them will eventually be caught like Patricia was. All it takes is one person to say no. One person to stop going along with the unreasonable demands. One person to ask why things are the way they are. Maybe that person is reading this story right now, wondering if they should challenge their own HOA's arbitrary rules. Maybe they're questioning whether they really need to repaint their mailbox in the approved shade of beige, or mow their lawn every Saturday regardless of weather, or remove their holiday decorations exactly 48 hours after the holiday ends. My advice: read your bylaws. Know your rights. Attend the meetings. Ask questions. And if something seems unreasonable, don't be afraid to say so. The worst thing that can happen is you'll be proven wrong and learn something new. The best thing that can happen is you might expose corruption and save your community from disaster. Or you might just save yourself from shoveling a playground every time it snows. That alone makes it worth the effort.